who actually decides your lifelong wealth? Like, if you are listening to this right now, you probably have a very specific and entirely logical answer in your head.
Right, you're thinking it's your intelligence.
Exactly. You think it's your brain or your work ethic, your ability to read the market or your discipline to save or just your sheer hustle.
Yep, the classic meritocracy myth.
Right. But today, we're going to start with a massive, counterintuitive slap in the face. Because your wealth, your lifelong financial security, it is not your brain, it is not your grit.
It is, quite frankly, pure, terrifying luck.
Terrifying is the right word for it. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to unpack something that completely rewrites the narrative of personal finance.
Yeah, we are drawing from this landmark study. It came out in 2017 in the Journal of Finance. And I want to be clear right off the bat, this isn't some, fringe psychological theory.
No, not at all.
This is rigorous, peer-reviewed financial economics. It basically proves how your early life experiences lock in your asset choices for the rest of your life.
Okay, so let's unpack this immediately. Because the mission for this deep dive is to basically walk you through a masterclass in human psychology.
Exactly.
We want to show you that the rational financial choices you made literally this morning, like whether you bought an index fund or you're hoarding cash in a savings account or, avoiding real estate, those are likely just emotional scars from your past.
Yeah, they aren't rational calculations. They're trauma responses.
Right. And recognizing this mechanism is, honestly, it's the ultimate shortcut to actually being in control of your wealth. So to set the stage, let's look at this fascinating control group they talk about in this field of research. Identical twins.
Oh, the twin studies? Yeah, these are the gold standard for separating nature from nurture. Because think about it. You have two genetically identical human beings.
Right, same exact DNA.
Same DNA, and they are raised in the exact same household. They eat the same food, they're exposed to the exact same parental financial habits, they go to the same schools.
So biologically and environmentally, their baseline is exactly the same.
Right, it's as identical as nature actually permits.
So logically, if financial decision-making is just driven by baseline intelligence or ingrained personality traits.
Which is what most people assume.
Yeah. Then those twins should arrive at adulthood with roughly similar risk tolerances, right? They should build wealth in pretty much similar ways.
But the data shows they completely don't.
They don't. It's wild. As adults, their financial lives often diverge wildly. One twin might aggressively buy stocks and build this massive fortune.
While the other one just sits in cash.
Exactly. Sits in cash, terrified of the market, and just watches inflation eat their savings. So if it's not their DNA and it's not their childhood environment, what breaks the tie?
It's their unique, highly personal, and honestly, almost entirely random life experiences.
Like what?
Specifically, the macroeconomic shocks they just happen to wander into as individuals once they leave the house. What happens to you in the real world burns a permanent map into your brain. The inheritance that actually dictates your financial future isn't your genetic code. It is the historical trauma you happen to live through.
Wow. I mean, this feels like a true crime mystery, but the victim is your own financial potential and the culprit is your own memory.
That's a great way to put it.
So to actually see this mechanism in action, we can't just look at a few pairs of twins. We need something bigger.
We need to look at an entire society.
Right. An entire society subjected to a perfectly observable, catastrophic shock. So we are going to travel back to 1990.
Okay, let's do it.
And we're going to look at how a perfectly prosperous, stable welfare state just completely collapsed in just 36 months.
Yeah, we're talking about the 1991 to 1993 Finnish Great Depression. And to really understand the psychological trauma that altered the behavior of a whole generation there, we have to grasp the sheer, unprecedented violence of this economic shock.
It was bad, right?
Oh, we are talking about a collapse that, for Finland, was significantly worse than the 2008 global financial crisis was for the United States.
Wait, worse than 2008?
Much worse in terms of the localized impact.
Okay, let's paint the picture of Finland in 1990. Because from everything I've read, this was like the poster child of Nordic stability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
High employment, incredibly robust social safety nets.
A highly educated workforce, a booming export economy. I mean, it was essentially a utopia. So how does a modern industrialized nation just break so thoroughly in 3 years?
It was the convergence of two massive, totally devastating forces hitting them at the exact same time.
A perfect storm.
Exactly. First, you have the sudden and absolute collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right, 1991.
And at the time, the Soviet Union wasn't just, a neighbor to Finland. It was a colossal trading partner. It accounted for roughly 20% of all Finnish exports.
Hold on, 20%.
Okay.
20% of a country's export market just vanishing overnight.
Yep.
Gone. I mean, that isn't a recession. That is an amputation.
It really was.
But surely, Finland was producing high-quality goods, right? Couldn't they just pivot, like, okay, Russia's out, let's sell these goods to Germany or the UK?
See, that is the logical assumption, but it ignores the physical mechanics of that specific trade relationship.
What do you mean?
The goods Finland was exporting to the Soviets were highly, highly specialized for the Soviet system. A prime example is railroad equipment.
Okay.
Finland manufactured train cars and railway infrastructure, specifically designed for Russian track gauges.
Which are different.
Yeah, they were significantly wider than the standard European gauges.
Oh, wow. So you literally cannot sell that train to France.
Exactly.
The wheels literally won't fit the tracks.
The product is geographically useless. And the trade itself was often handled through these bilateral clearing accounts.
What's that?
It was essentially a massive state-sponsored barter system. Finland sent specialized machinery, ships, consumer goods, and in return, the Soviet Union supplied Finland with crude oil and natural gas at highly favorable terms.
So no actual money is changing hands, it's just goods for oil.
Right. So when the Soviet Union officially dissolved, there was no transitional grace period. The demand evaporated instantly, the energy subsidies vanished, and entire factory towns in Finland were suddenly just producing useless metal.
That alone would cause a massive recession. Entire towns just shut down. But you mentioned a convergence of forces. What was the second blow?
A classic, catastrophic, twin currency and banking crisis.
Of course. It's always the banks.
Always. During the late 1980s, Finland, like many countries back then, aggressively deregulated its financial markets. Banks were suddenly allowed to lend much more freely.
Okay, so a credit boom.
A massive one. But because domestic interest rates in Finland were relatively high to combat inflation, Finnish corporations and even just regular citizens started taking out huge loans denominated in foreign currencies.
Because the interest rates on foreign money were lower.
Exactly. Much lower.
Uh-oh. I can see the trap forming right now. They are borrowing in foreign money because it's cheaper, but they are earning their salaries and revenues in the local Finnish currency, the marka.
Which only works if the exchange rate between the two currencies stays exactly the same.
And let me guess, it didn't.
Well, for a while it did, because the Finnish marka was pegged. The central bank artificially maintained its value.
Right, but then the Soviet trade collapses.
Exactly. The economy starts hemorrhaging money, foreign investors panic, and they start pulling their capital out of Finland. The central bank tried to defend the currency peg by raising interest rates to astronomical levels, but the pressure was just too immense.
They couldn't hold it.
No. In 1992, they had to let the currency float.
Which means it instantly devalued.
It completely plunged. And suddenly, anyone who held a loan in a foreign currency was utterly destroyed.
Oh my God. It's like taking out a mortgage on your house, and one morning the bank calls and says, hey, just because of the exchange rate, your principal just doubled.
And your monthly payment just tripled.
And by the way, the factory you work at just closed down so you don't even have a salary.
That is precisely what happened on a national scale. Asset prices collapsed, real estate values plummeted, credit completely froze because the banks themselves were insolvent from all the defaulting loans.
So just total gridlock.
The macroeconomic data from this period is staggering.
Mm-hmm.
Real GDP plummeted by 10%.
10%. Just so you, listening right now, have context for that number. In a normal, modern, developed economy, a 1 or 2% drop in GDP is like headline news. It causes political upheaval.
Oh, absolutely.
10% of the entire country's economic output just erased.
But the human cost is the data point that really sets up our psychological study today. Unemployment skyrocketed from a structural, comfortable level of around 3% all the way to a catastrophic 16%.
From 3% to 16% in 36 months.
Yeah.
You don't just read about an economy like that in the newspaper. You see it in your living room. You see it on your street. You feel it in your bones.
Like everyone.
But here's the thing about studying historical crises. Usually when economists or psychologists want to know how a disaster affects human behavior long term, they run into a massive data problem.
Surveys.
Exactly, surveys. They have to rely on asking people. They go to someone 10 or 20 years later and ask, hey, remember that awful depression back in the 90s? How did that impact your risk tolerance today?
And the problem with surveys is human memory. It is notoriously subjective and, honestly, highly malleable. In research, we call this recall bias.
Right.
We are constantly reconstructing our past memories to fit our current emotional narrative. If you happen to be wealthy and successful today, your brain might retroactively frame that past depression as a character-building challenge.
Oh, like it taught me grit. It made me stronger.
Exactly. But if you are struggling financially today, your brain looks back at the exact same event and frames it as an insurmountable trauma that ruined your life.
So you basically can't trust the human brain to report its own operating system accurately.
You really can't, which is why this 2017 study is so groundbreaking. The researchers didn't ask anyone how they felt.
They didn't use surveys at all.
Not one. They bypassed the flawed human memory entirely and relied on hard, unchangeable, cold data. See, Finland has one of the most comprehensive administrative register systems in the world.
Like tax records.
Way beyond that. Every citizen has a personal identification number that links their tax records, their employment history, their property ownership, and their exact stock market portfolios.
Wow. It's literally a researcher's dream.
It really is. The researchers isolated what we can call a golden sample. They looked at over 30,000 Finnish workers who were born between 1950 and 1965.
Okay, so people who are in their prime working years.
Right, their late 20s to early 40s when the 1991 depression hit.
Yeah.
And they tracked the exact financial movements of these 30,000 individuals for 15 solid years.
15 years.
From 1990, right before the crash, all the way up to 2005.
It's like they put an entire country in a giant petri dish, injected a highly contagious financial virus, and just watched exactly how it spread and mutated through the population over a decade and a half.
That's a perfect analogy.
There's no lying on a survey. There's no misremembering. It is a microscopic, unimpeachable view of every single dollar earned, lost, and invested.
Exactly. If they want to know if you were afraid of the stock market in 2005, they don't ask you. They just look at your tax return to see if you bought any equities.
It is the ultimate truth serum.
And what this data reveals is the first major terrifying insight of the study. A disaster that happened 15 years ago is still actively dictating your ability to build wealth today.
So the central question was, how does going through that labor market meat grinder in the 90s alter your willingness to buy stocks in 2005?
Precisely.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Because if I'm looking at this data, my immediate thought is causation versus correlation. Like, if you find that the people who got crushed by unemployment in 1992 are avoiding the stock market in 2005, how do you know the depression caused that fear? The hindsight myth.
Right. Maybe the people who got laid off were just naturally risk-averse people to begin with. Maybe they never liked stocks, even before the crisis. Did these victims just naturally hate the stock market?
That is the exact myth the researchers had to definitively debunk before they could prove anything else. And because they had the historical tax data, they could test this perfectly.
Oh.
They went back and looked at the investment habits of these exact same 30,000 workers in 1987, 1988, and 1989.
The boom years before the collapse.
Yes. If the hindsight myth is true, the data should show that the people who were eventually laid off in 1992 were already avoiding stocks in 1988.
Okay, what did the numbers show?
They showed absolutely zero correlation.
None. The researchers mapped out the pre-shock stock holding rates against the severity of the unemployment shock they would later face. The slope of that line was 0.117.
Which means what, visually? Like if I'm looking at a chart.
Visually, it is a flat horizontal line. There was no slope. The statistical t-value for this relationship was 1.07.
Okay, let's pause and translate that t-value for non-statisticians. If I'm running, say, a medical clinical trial for a new heart medication, what kind of t-value am I looking for to prove to the FDA that my drug actually works and it's not just a placebo?
In a standard medical trial, you generally want a t-value greater than 2 or less than -2. That gets you to a 95% confidence level. It proves your result didn't just happen by random chance.
Okay, and this study had a 1.07.
Right, a t-value of 1.07 is practically a statistical shrug. It means there is no measurable relationship whatsoever.
So, translated into human behavior, the disaster was a completely random lightning strike.
Completely ran.
The person who got crushed by the depression was just as likely to be an aggressive, optimistic stock market investor in 1989 as the person who skated through completely unharmed.
Exactly. The impact was entirely exogenous. It wasn't some pre-existing personality trait. It was an external force that just hit them out of nowhere.
Okay, so the baseline was set. Everyone was equal before the crash. What happened when they fast-forwarded 15 years?
So the year is 2005. The Finnish economy has long since recovered from the 1991 depression. Global markets are booming. The trauma is supposed to be ancient history.
Right.
In this group of 30,000 workers, the unconditional average stock ownership rate was 22%.
So across the whole sample, about 1 in 5 people held stocks.
Right. But then they segmented the data. They looked specifically at the people who lived through the absolute worst of the labor market collapse,
The ones who faced severe, prolonged unemployment.
or whose entire local industries were just decimated. For this top 20% of worst-hit victims, their participation in the stock market plummeted.
By how much?
They saw a net drop in stock ownership of 3.6 percentage points, compared to those who experienced the mildest shock.
3.6 percentage points. I really want to make sure you, the listener, absorb that number, because a 3.6 percentage point drop might sound like a minor rounding error if you're just skimming a textbook.
It sounds small on paper.
But we are talking about human lives over decades. If you take 3.6% of a population and lock them out of the stock market for 15, 20, or 30 years, you are talking about a staggering, astronomical loss of generational wealth.
Absolutely massive.
That is millions upon millions of dollars in compound interest, dividends, and corporate growth that those families just completely opted out of.
It is a massive structural divergence in wealth creation. And to ensure this wasn't just a fluke, the researchers ran what is known as a baseline regression.
What's that?
It's a rigorous statistical model designed to strip away every possible excuse, variable, or bit of noise. They controlled for the person's education level, their gender, their marital status, even whether their native language was Finnish or Swedish.
Wow. So they eliminated every single demographic scapegoat.
Every single one. And after controlling for all of that, the coefficient for the labor market shock remained incredibly powerful. The t-value for this negative effect was negative 5.97.
Okay, going back to our medical trial analogy, if a t-value of 2 proves your heart drug works, a t-value of negative 5.97 is what?
It is an absolute slam dunk. The probability of this result being a random coincidence is astronomically low, essentially zero.
Wow.
It's as close to absolute, undeniable certainty as the social sciences can ever get. The experience of the severe depression pressed a permanent off switch in their willingness to take financial risks.
And that switch was still physically flipped off a decade and a half later. So their dreams of building long-term wealth through equities were just quietly dismantled by an event that happened before the turn of the millennium. The psychological shock essentially acted as a permanent governor on their financial engine, artificially capping their willingness to take risks.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. But, the researchers knew that any traditional economist reading this paper would instantly raise a massive, seemingly obvious objection.
Right, because my common sense is screaming at me right now, and I bet you listening are deducing this exact same thing.
What's your instinct?
If you lose your job and your economy collapses and you suffer through a 3-year depression, you stop buying stocks because you have no money.
Naturally.
You are broke.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Depression wiped out their personal wealth and destroyed their income. So in 2005, they aren't avoiding the stock market out of fear. They simply don't have the disposable capital to meet the fixed costs of investing.
See, it is the most intuitive assumption possible. We call it the wealth and income channel. It makes perfect logical sense. If a shock drains your savings account, you can't participate in equity markets.
Right. You can't invest what you don't have.
And the data initially confirmed this damage. The Depression significantly lowered personal assets. People were materially poorer.
So the researchers had to figure out a way to separate the empty wallet from the broken mind.
Exactly.
How do you prove that fear is causing the lack of investing and not just poverty?
This is the biggest, most shocking twist in the entire paper. Because they had total unimpeded access to 15 years of tax and asset records, they could isolate specific groups of people.
Okay.
They mathematically controlled for all current assets, all liabilities, and all income in the year 2005.
Wait, so they isolated the people who got hammered by the Depression in 1992, but who by 2005 had completely bounced back.
Yes. People who were making great salaries again, had high net worths, and had plenty of disposable cash.
And what happened when these wealthy, fully recovered people woke up in 2005? Did they buy stocks?
They still refused to invest.
You're kidding.
I'm not. Even when the mathematical model explicitly held wealth and income constant, the psychological shock coefficient remained massive. The effect barely diluted at all.
I need a second to process that. You are telling me that their wallets were full, their income was high, they had the capital to invest, but their minds were entirely broken.
That is the exact takeaway. The paper proves that the avoidance of the stock market is a pure trauma response. It's reshaping their core fundamental beliefs about the world.
It is not a mechanical lack of funds.
No, the event completely altered their perception of risk. They looked at a booming global stock market in 2005. They had thousands of dollars sitting in their checking accounts, and their brains simply screamed, danger.
That is profound. And honestly, it is a little terrifying because it completely shatters how we usually think about financial therapy.
How so?
Well, we assume that if we are stressed about money, the cure is more money. We think if I just get that promotion, or if I finally pay off my student loans, or if I get an inheritance, my financial anxiety will vanish and I'll finally start investing aggressively.
Right, the just one more dollar fallacy.
But this data says that getting a raise doesn't fix the underlying trauma. You can be rich on paper, but still be operating your life from the defensive crouch of a survivor.
Because the risk preferences themselves have been permanently altered. The belief in the fairness or the stability or the safety of the market has been shattered. The wealth is restored, but the trust is gone.
Okay, so let's say someone listening right now is thinking, well, this is fascinating, but I'm insulated. I'm smart. I picked a perfectly safe, recession-proof career. I have a government job, or I'm a tenured teacher or a doctor. I have an iron rice bowl.
It can't happen to me, defense.
Yeah, I don't get laid off during depressions. So this psychological trauma doesn't apply to my portfolio.
Well, that brings us to what might be the most chilling finding of the entire study. The contagion of fear.
Contagion. Like a virus.
Exactly like a virus. Think having a perfectly safe, unshakable job protects your mind. Think again. The researchers deliberately set out to test if trauma could be caught indirectly.
How do you prove that fear is contagious without the subject actually getting hit by the disaster? Did the researchers look at social networks?
They did exactly that. They started by isolating what they categorized as the safe professions. They ranked all 326 distinct professions in Finland based on how much unemployment that specific job experienced during the Depression.
And they took the safest ones.
They took the absolute lowest decile, the people who were virtually untouched by the economic collapse.
What kind of jobs are we talking about here?
Physicians, pharmacists, nurses, priests, judges, maritime pilots, air traffic controllers.
Okay, so jobs where the baseline demand for the skill remains completely constant, regardless of whether the stock market is up 20% or the Soviet Union ceases to exist.
Exactly. People still get sick. Ships still need to be guided into port. The data showed that only about 8% of these professionals experienced even a single month of unemployment during the entire 3-year crisis.
Wow.
They kept their jobs, they kept their salaries, they kept their benefits.
They had the perfect hedge. From a purely material standpoint, they won the game.
Materially, yes, but psychologically, no. When the researchers looked at the stock market participation of these highly secure professionals 15 years later in 2005, their participation had still fallen off a cliff.
But why? Nothing happened to them. Their paychecks kept clearing every 2 weeks.
Because they witnessed the collapse all around them. This is the phenomenon of indirect secondhand experience. You didn't lose your job, but you were forced to watch the carnage happen to the people in your ecosystem.
Wow.
The researchers mapped this out geographically to measure what we can call the neighbor effect.
So literally looking out your window.
Exactly. The data showed that if you lived in a neighborhood that suffered high local unemployment during the 1991 Depression, even if your own personal job was 100% secure, you still systematically refused to buy stocks in 2005.
That's insane.
The coefficient for this neighbor effect was highly significant. It was a massive behavioral shift.
Let me visualize this. I'm a doctor. I go to the hospital every day. My salary is perfectly fine. But I drive home, and I see my neighbor who works at the local shipyard that just lost its Soviet contracts, losing his house.
Right.
I see the moving truck. I see his car get repossessed. I see the physical decaying stress on his face when he checks his mail. And that visual, that sheer physical proximity to another human being's pain, infects my own financial choices a full decade later.
Yes. Your brain absorbs the danger of the environment regardless of your personal safety within that environment.
It's like secondhand smoke for your portfolio.
That's brilliant. Yes, exactly. And it gets even more intimate and more damaging than just neighbors. The trauma travels through bloodlines.
The intergenerational curse.
The researchers examined familial networks and found that if your sibling or your parent lost their job, it directly depressed your future stock holdings.
Wow.
They looked specifically at young people who were just children or teenagers during the 1990 crash. Kids who were between 8 and 18 years old.
So they weren't even in the labor market. They didn't have jobs to lose.
They were just kids watching cartoons, doing homework, totally removed from the macroeconomic reality.
But they were intimately watching their parents.
Exactly. The data definitively showed that if a father experienced severe labor market distress during the Depression, it significantly depressed his children's willingness to invest in the stock market 15 years later.
When those children were finally adults in their 20s and 30s with their own paychecks.
Right. The coefficient for the father's unemployment was clearly visible in the kids' tax returns a decade later.
Wow. So today's hyper-conservative, risk-averse 25-year-old saver is just unconsciously acting out their father's past pain.
Yep. The father takes the economic hit in 1991, and the child's investment portfolio bleeds the opportunity costs in 2005.
That is heartbreaking.
And intriguingly, they found the effect was actually stronger on the younger children, the 8 to 12-year-old, than on the older teenagers.
Why is that?
Because the younger you are, when you witness the financial trauma and vulnerability of your primary protector, the deeper that historical stamp is burned into your developing psyche.
Well, wait, let me push back again because I want to make absolutely sure we are isolating pure fear here.
Okay, what's the
Or
alternative?
I'll call this the charity excuse. Is it possible that these safe doctors or these grown-up kids just stopped investing because they had to lend all their extra cash to their unemployed dad or their broke neighbor or their struggling sibling?
Ah, a wealth transfer.
Yeah. Maybe it's not a psychological fear of the market. Maybe they were just acting as an informal family safety net, transferring their wealth, so they literally didn't have the spare cash to put into an index fund.
It's an excellent hypothesis,
Yeah.
and it's exactly the kind of alternative mechanism economists look for. But again, the administrative data decisively proves it wrong.
How so?
Because the researchers had total visibility into every single citizen's net worth year over year. They tracked the personal asset accumulation of these safe individuals who had unemployed family members. Their personal assets did not drop. Their overall net worth continued to grow perfectly normally throughout the decade.
So they didn't drain their accounts to save their relatives?
No. There was no massive transfer of wealth that depleted their investment capital. They had the money. It is purely 100% belief contagion.
Okay, this is where we have to dive into the why. We've established what the data is undeniable. But as a human being, I want to know why our brains are actively sabotaging our ability to assess reality.
It's frustrating, isn't it?
It is. If the economy has recovered and my bank account's full, why is my brain acting like it's still 1992? Why are we wired this way?
It comes down to a well-documented cognitive trap in behavioral psychology known as availability bias, or the availability heuristic.
Okay, break that down for us.
To understand this, we have to look at how the human brain evolved. We are not naturally wired to calculate abstract statistical probabilities. If I ask you the statistical likelihood of a market dropping by 10% in a given year, your brain doesn't pull up a spreadsheet. Instead, we calculate risk based on how easily we can recall a vivid, emotionally salient example of a disaster.
Oh, this is Daniel Kahneman's territory.
Exactly.
It's why people are absolutely terrified of shark attacks or plane crashes, even though statistically they're incredibly rare, but they text and drive every single day without a second thought.
Yes, because the image of the plane crash or the shark from Jaws is highly available in the memory.
It's vivid.
Vivid and terrifying. The human amygdala prioritizes vivid threats to our survival. Because these Finnish workers and their children and their secure neighbors saw a catastrophic economic event happen right in front of their eyes, their brains permanently overestimated the baseline risk of a catastrophic market crash for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
The emotional trauma physically short-circuits the rational, calculating prefrontal cortex. When they look at a stock offering in 2005, they don't see a PE ratio, they don't see a dividend yield, and they don't see historical market averages.
What do they see?
They literally see their neighbor getting evicted in 1992.
The ghost is right there in the spreadsheet. Their brain is basically saying, I survived a famine once. I am never taking my grain out of the silo again, even if the fields are full.
Exactly.
But this brings up a huge mystery regarding the data. If these doctors with safe jobs, these folks whose wealth recovered, if they aren't buying stocks but their personal assets are still growing, where did all their money actually go?
The asset secret.
Right. They didn't just physically stuff it in a mattress, did they?
No. And tracking where the money flowed is the final piece of evidence that proves the psychological theory perfectly. They didn't exit the financial system altogether. They just aggressively poured their wealth into specific, highly defensive vehicles.
So what were they buying instead of stocks?
Fixed income funds, safe government bonds, guaranteed bank deposits. The researchers noted that while their participation in the stock market plummeted, their holdings in risk-free or low-risk assets remained completely steady or even grew,
Ah, so they were desperately trying to lock the door.
locking the door against a monster that was no longer there. Exactly.
They actively chose asset classes that promised capital preservation over any kind of growth. And to get that perceived safety, they willingly paid a massive premium.
What was the premium?
The lost compound returns over a 15-year bull market. They completely avoided any asset class that exhibited volatility because volatility felt like the chaos of 1991.
They bought emotional insurance instead of financial growth.
That's a great way to phrase it.
Which leads us to what I think is the ultimate macroeconomic nightmare, the true wealth curse of this entire phenomenon.
The big picture.
Yeah, because when you step back from the individual data points, when you stop looking at the 3.6% drops and the individual doctors and the traumatized kids, and you look at the entire society as an ecosystem, you realize something horrifying.
Which is?
Your free will in whether you buy a house or invest in the S&P 500 or start a business is mostly an illusion. It is just the shadow of history deciding for you. It really is a universal human blueprint. To prove that this isn't just a quirk of Finnish culture or the specific politics of the 1990s, the researchers actually compare their findings from the 1991 Finnish Depression to landmark studies done on the depression babies of the 1929 American Great Depression.
But wait, you were talking about two totally different areas.
Completely different.
Different continents, entirely different cultures, different political systems, and vastly different technological landscapes.
Different contexts in almost every conceivable way. And yet the behavioral results are shockingly, almost perfectly identical.
Are you serious?
Dead serious. The human trauma mechanism operates exactly the same way. Whether you were an American auto worker in the 1930s or a Finnish factory worker in the 1990s, if you experienced severe macroeconomic trauma during your formative years, you bore a historical stamp that made you systematically pessimistic and risk-averse for decades to come.
Man, we walk around thinking we are making rational, spreadsheet-based calculations about our 401ks, but we are actually just acting out evolutionary survival scripts written by the disasters we happen to witness.
Yep. We're just meat computers running old trauma software.
But if we connect this psychological reality to the bigger picture, this isn't just a quirky behavioral economics fact. This is the invisible underlying engine driving the most contentious economic issue of our time.
You're talking about structural wealth inequality.
Yes. Think about the math here.
Huh.
The global stock market is historically one of the greatest, most consistent engines for wealth creation in human history.
Without a doubt.
Over decades, despite the crashes, it goes up, it compounds, it generates massive dividends. But accessing that wealth requires you to sit through the terrifying dips without panicking.
And if we connect our data to that bigger picture of inequality, when an entire generation of the working and middle class is too traumatized by a past catastrophic event to buy stocks, they completely sideline themselves.
Right.
They voluntarily miss out on decades of corporate growth, compound interest, and wealth generation.
While the people who didn't get traumatized, who are often the already wealthy, the people whose massive capital reserves shielded them from the brutal, visceral edges of the labor market crash, they just keep investing.
They do. In fact, they keep buying assets at depressed prices during the crash. They keep compounding their wealth.
It creates a massive geometric structural divergence. The psychological trauma acts as an invisible wedge, constantly driving the rich and the middle class further apart, generation after generation.
Because remember the intergenerational curse we discussed earlier?
Yeah, right. The kids.
The trauma is inherited. The child of the traumatized middle-class worker also avoids the stock market when they come of age. So the opportunity cost compounds geometrically over 30, 40, 50 years.
So the traumatized middle class holds on to cash and safe government bonds, watching inflation slowly eat away their purchasing power year after year.
And they feel secure because there is no volatility.
But in reality, they are mathematically getting poorer.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, the unaffected wealthy hold equities and ride the massive wave of global economic growth. This behavioral trauma is the ultimate invisible curse. It's not just that the 1991 Depression took their jobs for 3 years. The Depression permanently stole their psychological ability to participate in the 21st century economy.
And it highlights a critical reality for policymakers, too.
Yeah?
Why are swift, effective responses to economic crises so absolutely critical? Because a severe recession doesn't just cause temporary pain or a dip in that year's tax revenue. It fundamentally alters the behavioral DNA of the populace.
Wow.
A government that allows unemployment to spiral out of control isn't just failing the current year's GDP metric. They are actively depressing the wealth-building capacity of their own citizens for the next 30 to 40 years.
That is a staggering responsibility. Okay, let's pull all of this together because we have been on a massive journey today.
We really have.
We started by challenging the illusion of control, the comfortable idea that your intelligence and hard work dictate your wealth. We watched a Nordic utopia collapse in 36 months, wiping out 20% of its export market overnight and quintupling its unemployment rate.
We saw how that unprecedented collapse was tracked flawlessly across 30,000 human lives, utilizing hard tax data to eliminate the subjective bias of memory.
We proved that a purely random exogenous shock to the labor market created a 15-year financial star.
And we shattered the intuitive myth that they simply stopped investing because they were broke.
Right. We saw that even for those whose bank accounts completely recovered, their minds stayed frozen in 1992.
We saw how fear contagiously infected the safe doctors, the neighbors looking out their windows, and even the innocent children who merely absorbed the stress of their parents.
We uncovered the evolutionary cognitive trap availability bias that forced them to pour their recovered wealth into safe bonds, desperately locking the door against a monster that had already left the building, paying a massive premium in lost returns.
And finally, we saw how this universal human trauma is the invisible, historical hand-driving wealth inequality.
Effectively keeping the traumatized middle class locked out of the greatest wealth-generating engine in history.
Ultimately, investing is not a spreadsheet, it is an emotional battlefield. And the data clearly shows that a 15-year trauma cannot be erased just by getting a raise, paying off your car, or seeing a green arrow on a stock ticker.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I want you to genuinely, deeply ask yourself, how much of your current financial strategy, your retirement plan, your savings rate, your fear of crypto or real estate or the S&P 500, how much of that is based on actual dispassionate logic?
That's the million-dollar question.
And how much of it is based on a scary headline you read 5 years ago, or a story your parents told you around the dinner table about losing their home in the 2008 housing crash, or the panic of the dot-com bubble, or seeing your own neighbors struggle during the recent pandemic lockdowns?
It requires an intense, often uncomfortable level of self-audit. To break the cycle, you have to constantly ask yourself, am I reacting to the mathematical data of today, or am I reacting to the ghosts of my past?
Exactly. Because if you don't audit your own history, your history will quietly and inevitably dictate your future. Look at the world today. Look at Gen Z and millennials.
Oh, absolutely.
In just the last 2 decades, young people have witnessed massive, once-in-a-generation global crises back-to-back. A Great Recession that destroyed the housing market, a global pandemic that completely shut down the world economy, and historic runaway inflation that crushed purchasing power.
They have absorbed macroeconomic shocks that are entirely exogenous, just like the Finnish workers in 1991. The critical question for economists and psychologists now is, how will that compounded trauma manifest in their investment portfolios in 2035 or 2040?
Are we doomed to repeat the story of the Finnish Great Depression? When fear becomes our only inheritance, how do you actively choose to break the curse of historical memory? It's arguably the most important financial question you can ask yourself today.
I completely agree.
The data is clear. The mechanism is exposed. You see the scar. The only question left is what you choose to do about it tomorrow.
It's been an absolute pleasure dissecting this immense topic with you. Until next time, I encourage everyone to question everything they think they know about their own mind.
See you on the next deep dive. Stay curious, stay rational, and whatever you do, don't let the ghosts manage your money.